most exculpatory tweet. He sent out a tweet saying, these are the ceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever. And of course, much of the damage had already taken place. As everyone knows, 5 people were lost in the mob violence that was unleashed against the Congress of the United States, including a Capitol Hill police officer. And as the scale of the violence and the damage became clear, the president quickly deleted that tweet and then tweeted, I suppose this was his most forceful one, "Go home, we love you, you're very special." That was at the end of the day, basically when most of the devastating damage had already been wrought on the people of the Congress. My friends, when we talk about the 25th Amendment, we don't have to find that the president committed a high crime and misdemeanor in inciting this mob insurrection. And I think there's overwhelming proof that he did, but we don't have to prove that for the 25th Amendment. All we have to ask is whether the president lived up to the most basic and minimal expectations for his duties of office. Can you imagine any other president of the United States doing what this president did? Can you imagine President Bush doing that? Can you imagine President Obama doing that? Can you imagine President Lincoln doing that? Franklin Roosevelt, the Democrat, or Teddy Roosevelt, the Republican? Can you imagine any other president in our history encouraging and fomenting mob violence against the Congress of the United States, against our people? That's the question. And if you're with me and you can't imagine any other president doing that, and you think he failed the basic duties of office, then I think the vice president has a duty to act. And I'm with Mr. Cole in saluting the vice president for doing his duty on January the 6th. He came under enormous, phenomenal, unprecedented pressure by the president of the United States to step out of his role as the person simply presiding over the counting of the electoral votes and to try to nullify and overturn the election. That just deepens the complicity of the president with this horrific assault on the counting of the Electoral College. But the vice president stood up at that moment. We're asking the vice president to stand up again. For all of those people who voted, I think, foolishly with the president's wishes to deny the Electoral College votes that were cast by our states, by our state officials, despite the fact that the president brought 62 different cases in federal and state court and lost 61 of them soundly, decisively, and in many cases of humiliatingly, as the judges castigated the president for bringing such nonsense before the courts. But for those who decided to go along with that and help to drive that wound into the country, and who are now calling for bringing the country together, those people who are now calling for reconciliation, this is the road to reconciliation. It is the vice president himself who is the key actor, and it is the president's own cabinet who make up the key actors, the principal officers of each of the departments of government. They can help to lead us out of the nightmare that we've been plunged into by this sequence of events. They can transfer peacefully the powers of the president to the vice president, Mike Pence, for the remainder of this term, so we can have a peaceful transition of power. My friends, on the extreme right-wing websites that help to build the president's rally, the Save America rally, they are calling for the mobs to come back to Washington and to continue the assault on the Republic of the United States. They are calling for continued war, and they are calling it war against our government. They want to see this mob insurrection spread. One of the ones I read said that they are going to come back with so many people that no army will be able to stop them. This is not just a crisis and an emergency. It is a continuing crisis and emergency. It is not over yet. Can we say that we feel safe being in the hands of this president, with the horror and the threats returning to the nation's capital? Well, we are asking Vice President Pence with this resolution and the cabinet to act with the powers that were wisely put into place by the Congress back in 1967. They should meet, they should consider all of the circumstances, and they should move to restore order to the United States of America. With that, I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And before I yield to Mr. Jordan, let me just say, without objection, any written materials that you submit to the rules documents at mail.house.gov before the conclusion of this hearing will be entered into the record. At this point, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too want to associate myself with the remarks of the chairman and the ranking member regarding our colleague from Maryland and what his family is dealing with. Mr. Chairman, what happened at the Capitol on January 6th was as wrong can be. It is not what America is about. Political violence of any kind is wrong. We condemn this violence. We commend the men and women of the Capitol Police for their bravery, and we mourn those who've lost their lives. All political violence should be condemned all the time. This should not be a partisan issue. Republicans have been consistent. We condemned the violence last summer. We condemned the violence last week. Congress needs to stop this effort to remove the president from office just 1 week before he is set to leave. Continued calls to impeach the president or remove him from office with using the 25th Amendment, I don't think are healthy for our nation. Rushing this resolution to the floor will do nothing to unify or heal the country. Under the plan Speaker Pelosi laid out on Sunday, the Democrats plan to impeach the president a second time just days before, as I said, he is set to leave. These actions will only again continue to divide the nation. Turning to the 25th Amendment into a political weapon by demanding that the vice president invoke it to remove the president from office, I think is just wrong. Let's be clear. Democrats have been wanting to remove President Trump from office since he won the election in 2016. They failed with the Russia investigation, they failed with the Mueller investigation, and they failed with their first impeachment investigation. So here we are again, considering another divisive effort to go after President Trump. We should use this time to bring the nation together, heal our partisan divisions. We should use this time to help the small business owners across the country who are struggling because of government's actions that close their businesses and close their stores. We should use this time to honor the men and women of law enforcement here at the Capitol and across the country who sacrifice themselves to keep our families safe. But it looks like we're not going to go down that path. We're here again to consider a Democrat resolution to attack the president just 8 days before he has said he will leave office, just 8 days before we will have a peaceful transition of power as we have had in this country every 4 or 8 years since our nation's founding. I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution and would yield back.
Thank you very much. Let me just let me begin if I could. Mr. Jordan, this isn't a both sides issue. Our Capitol was attacked. 5 people are dead. Countless people are wounded. We had a group of domestic terrorists, homegrown fascists that came to the Capitol building to desecrate this symbol of democracy and freedom, and to do harm to people. And with all due respect, I'm glad that all it took for you to call for unity and healing was for our freedom and our democracy to be attacked. But for the last several months, the gentleman from Ohio and others have given oxygen to the president's conspiracy theories. And we all want healing, but in order to get to healing, we need truth and we need accountability. People came to the Capitol building to try to launch a coup to stop us from upholding our constitutional responsibilities. I was on the floor, the House floor. I know you were and others, but I was one of the last people to walk off the House floor. And when I went into the Speaker's lobby, I saw this mob trying to break glass doors to get access to the floor and God knows what else. They defied the Capitol Police, who were bravely trying to protect us. And I saw in their eyes, hate and evil. And I'm just grateful that more people weren't harmed in this terrible attack. But they came here to destroy things, to desecrate things. And they did so because the President of the United States told them to go do it. At his urging, they came to the Capitol. Some of them, I'm listening to some of the commentary, thought he was here. But he incited that mob, and unfortunately, some of our colleagues joined in that effort to gin things up. And our job as elected officials is to tell the truth. So my question for you is, will you admit that Joe Biden won fair and square and the election was not rigged or stolen?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can.
Mr. Chairman, what I did over the past several months is follow the process that the Constitution prescribes. It wasn't me who said it, was Justice Ginsburg.
That's not the question I asked.
No, I'll get to the question, but I'm going to get to your comments too.
I don't need to filibuster. We just want to get.
I'm not going to filibuster, Mr. Chairman. The late Justice Ginsburg said January 6th is the date of ultimate significance. That's how Congress set this up in the statute they passed dealing with the 12th Amendment. So we followed that process, and at 4 a.m. on Thursday, January 7th, when we concluded our business on the floor, Vice President Biden became President-elect Biden. That's how the process plays out. Those of us who spoke against the unconstitutional way several states conducted their election, we're following the process, and we did nothing different than Democrats have done every time a Republican's been elected this century. In fact, our colleague who is sponsoring this resolution objected to on January 6, 2017.
So is that
we followed the process. Of course, it's a yes, and I've said that publicly on television on Sunday.
But I'm not asking about the process. I'm asking you to make a statement that the election was not stolen, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won fair and square. That's the question.
The question you asked me was, is Joe Biden the vice president? Is Vice President Biden? And I said yes, of course he is.
I just repeated the question. So Joe Biden won fair and square.
He won the election because the way the process works is the last chance to object is January 6th, and
if we want to talk about
objection didn't prevail.
If we want to talk about healing, we have to talk about truth. And if we want to talk about healing, we also need to deal with the issue of accountability. And what this president incited last Wednesday is unforgivable and unconscionable. I'm used to the excesses of this president, the over-the-top statements, the pandering to some of the most intolerant groups in this country. But I never thought I would see what he said at that rally. And so the deal is, my question was very simple. I'm asking you to make a statement that the election was not stolen, that Joe Biden won fair and square. And, one of the ways to promote healing is for you to say yes and to put that on in your Twitter account so that all these people who bought into a lie will start hearing from some of the people that were pushing this. The answer is, the American people.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
yes.
Joe Biden is going to be sworn in as president. He is President-elect Joe Biden.
That's not the question I asked. That is not the question I asked.
Yeah, our concern and why we raised objections was in several states, the rules were changed in unconstitutional fashion when the state legislature did not change election law. You had Secretary of States, you had governors, you had Supreme Courts. In some cases, you had county clerks changing the election law. That's what we're pointing out. That's all we were pointing out.
Yeah, well.
Just like our colleague, Mr. Raskin, pointed out concerns he had on January 6, 2017, with the election of
The gentleman
President
will
Trump then.
suspend. You refuse to answer that question, and I think that's one of the, you want to talk
I
about.
do not refuse. He's going to be the president. I've said that on television. He's going to be the president. I know that. The country knows that.
That is not the question I asked. I asked you to lay bare the fact that this lie out there that somehow that Joe Biden did not win the election fair and square. He did. The president to this day continues to perpetrate that. And so does.
Are you saying there was no problems with, there was no concerns with this election? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Chairman? Of course, I understand Joe Biden won, but are you saying there's no concerns with this election?
I will yield to the gentleman from Maryland if he has any.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to make one point about this somewhat abstruse Article 2, Section 1 argument that was made the day when all of us almost lost our lives, as Lindsey Graham put it. I was moved by something Lindsey Graham said. He said, these people came in to the buildings without the metal detectors. They could have been armed. They could have had a bomb, and all of us could have died. So I think we do have to try to step up our discussion from the normal level of just partisan rhetorical combat and point scoring. The point our colleague from Ohio makes about Article 2, Section 1 was raised by Trump's campaign team in numerous courts across the country, where it faced the same massive, decisive repudiation by Trump's own appointees, by Republican judges, by Democratic judges. It is ridiculous and empty. It's an empty void. There's basically nothing to respond to there. And the state legislatures that they are nominally advocating for are not taking that position. Those legislatures are not going to court to try to say our own Supreme Court violated our prerogatives. Our own governor violated our prerogatives. Nobody buys that. So Mr. Jordan is correct. They had an argument. It is a ridiculous and silly argument. And this is a point of common sense. And I want America here to follow the great Tom Paine. Use your common sense. That argument was made, and it helped to delay the proceedings. And then this mob comes in, and there's at least one call from the president during the mayhem and the chaos to a senator telling him to keep the objections going and to prolong the process. So I just disagree profoundly with the substance of that argument. Every court in the land that looked at it has rejected it. The state legislatures don't buy it. It's fine that Mr. Jordan wants to go back to it, but I think all of us should do some soul searching about 5 dead Americans, a Capitol police officer who's dead, dozens of people wounded, lots of our Capitol Hill cops in the hospitals, and a country on edge, and an inflamed right wing which thinks that we are on the verge of a civil war. Now, come on, guys. Can we get it together to act as a rules committee together as a Congress to tell the vice president simply to acknowledge what's obvious, which is this president is not up to the job for the next 8 days, and a lot of danger still faces us. That's my perspective on it.
Well, I don't want to belabor this point, but I will be honest with you. I am stunned that after all that has happened, that we can't get a definitive answer. That
Mr. Chairman,
is not still.
Mr. Chairman, I said that Joe Biden won the election, but there were problems with how it was done, I think, in an unconstitutional fashion in the states we objected to. I would also point out,
people came here.
You guys, do you disagree with what Justice Ginsburg said?
People came here, Mr. Jordan, because they believed the lie that the president and many people in this chamber perpetrated, that this election was not run in a fair and square fashion. And to the president to this day continues to perpetrate the lie that somehow he won this election by a landslide. And so I think, we want to talk about healing. I mean, the people who came here thought the president was telling the truth. Not many of you who were backing him up were telling the truth. And it ended up in this terrible ordeal in which 5 people lost their life. So,
Mr. Chairman, did you object in 2017 on January 6th?
I didn't say the election was stolen. I said, in fact, I acknowledged that he was the president the day after the day after the election. Hillary Clinton conceded the day after the election.
I think you said
I
the
even went to
electors.
his inauguration. It was painful, but I went to his inauguration.
I think you said
so
the electors were not
raised
lawfully
objections to-
certified.
Mr. Jordan, excuse me. What I raised objections to was the fact that all of our intelligence agencies had raised concerns about Russian interference in our election, which apparently didn't matter to some of you. But
No, it
that's what I
wasn't
did.
true.
I did not
Wasn't true.
question. I did not try to overturn the election. And it went.
So,
and
so you're allowed to object and we're not?
The
Is that how it is?
protestation was 8 minutes. All right. So anyway, I think you have answered my question, and I will now.
No, we have a double standard. You and Mr. Raskin are allowed to object in 2017. No Republicans are allowed to.
Mr. Chairman, could I respond to that?
Yes, I yield to the gentleman.
Okay. There's a terrible false moral equivalency going on here. Throughout American history, a lot of members have tried to point out technical or procedural problems in the Electoral College. The one that I pointed out was that there were elected officials who were also electors in violation of the state constitution. I think it was in Florida, and I think I simply raised that point for maybe it was 15 or 20 seconds. Nowhere did I ever incite mob insurrection against the government of the United States. There were millions of people, to take up the chairman's point, who were convinced that Vladimir Putin, with his cyber sabotage against the DNC and Hillary Clinton and so on, had profoundly influenced the outcome of the 2016 election. But what did the Democrats do? They put on, pink winter hats, marched peacefully with 1 million people, joined Planned Parenthood, worked with their churches to try to reform America. Nobody was out there agitating for a violent armed insurrection against the government of the United States. I yield back.
Yeah, I thank the gentleman, and I'll just conclude by saying I acknowledge that Donald Trump was the president-elect the day after the election. I didn't like it, but I acknowledged it. The trouble here is my friends have been spending the last few months saying that the election was stolen. In fact, the gentleman from Ohio even went to a rally called Stop the Steal. So, and we have a president now that continues to put out this big lie that he won the election by a landslide. So there's a big difference here. But with that, I yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, for any questioning and comments he may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to what I see as the central issue, which is the exercise of the 25th Amendment. And when I asked you, Mr. Jordan, just a simple question. As I recall, you served with Vice President Pence when he was in the House. Certainly know him as Vice President. Do you think he's capable of exercising the 25th Amendment? Do you think he would do so if he felt that was the appropriate action for him to take?
Yeah, and he's actually answered the question. I appreciate the ranking member's question. The Vice President answered the question. He is, as a defender of the Constitution, he said he is not going to invoke the 25th Amendment, Section 4. He said that. My understanding is the Vice President and President were together yesterday talking about this issue and others as well. So Vice President Pence has been clear. As you know, we both had the opportunity to serve with him. He was a mentor to me. I think you and he came about the same time, but I came after the Vice President was here, and he has been very clear where he stands on this issue that the other side is bringing forward.
So you trust him to make the judgment?
Mike Pence, Mike Pence is a good guy. I trust him. I think the country trusts him. I think the president trusts him.
That's all the only question I have, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I yield to the gentlewoman from California, Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Throughout our history, the Rules Committee has met to discuss many historic measures, and today is no exception. We are making history once again, and to discuss events that will forever stain this great institution in our democracy. I speak today in support of the Raskin resolution, a call for Vice President Pence to live up to the oath he swore upon taking office. An oath that says he will protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And as we meet with wounded hearts in our wounded Capitol building, there is no debate that these hollow halls were violated last week. There is no debate that the mob that breached these walls and was energized by misinformation, bald-faced lies, and claims that are in direct odds with our Constitution. And there is no debate as to who misled those people, who sent them here to ravage our Capitol, who it was who undermined our American democracy. President Trump, that's who it was. He called for insurrection on social media, on a stage with television cameras capturing his every word. I am saddened that my colleagues will dare to stand on that stage and do the same. 6 Americans are now dead. 2 of them were Capitol Police officers. More than 50 officers were injured, 15 hospitalized. Trump incited this attack, and there should be no question as to what Vice President Pence needs to do right now. Like many of you, some of you, I was caught up in that attack last week. I was one of 12 trapped in the House gallery. I heard the shot being fired. I saw the smoke from the tear gas having been deployed. And I watched one officer with no protective equipment face a raging mob just outside the chamber. We crawled across the entire length of that balcony. I was in the last group to be evacuated. We ran down the halls, stairs, near a mob that was being held on the ground at gunpoint. I sheltered for 4 to 5 hours in a room that was packed shoulder to shoulder with people. Adding more trauma to the riot we had just survived were several Republican colleagues refusing to wear a mask. As a result, many of my dear colleagues and friends have tested positive. I'm waiting my results. I know some of you had similar experiences. The horror didn't care what chamber you served in. But I do know that in the balcony, it was Democrats and members of the press. Ask yourselves, is gunfire in the speaker's lobby a new normal that you're willing to accept? Should ransacked offices be part of the job going forward? A relic from our time in service that future members will have to deal with? And if it's not, ask yourselves, what are you willing to do about it? Do you have the courage to stand up for basic American principles? The Raskin resolution is not a political document. It takes no partisan position. And anyone who says otherwise is being irresponsible and is continuing to advance the hateful agenda of Donald Trump. How dare you? How dare you incite a mob to stop the final step in certifying our election, simply because they want to pick and choose whose vote should count and whose votes should not count. It calls on one man with the power to protect all of us, our institution, from this increasingly authoritarian president to do just that, invoke the 25th Amendment and live up to the oath that he swore. Given the news of impeding armed protests here and at every capital across our country this coming week, Vice President Pence's action cannot come soon enough. Consider the full gravity of the attack last week. Yes, it was an attack on Democrat lawmakers, on this beloved building, and on Vice President Pence. They wanted to hang him. But Congress was convened last Wednesday for the ceremonial certification of our election results. So this was also an attack on our democracy. It was an attack on the peaceful transfer of power, an attack on our Constitution and the rule of law. It was an attack on the symbolism that we've provided to the entire world, that a people can govern themselves without the threat of force or the violence. And it was an attack that almost worked. All of us has a role to play in undoing the damage that President Trump has done. I urge my colleagues, when I was finally evacuated at 3 p.m. and while running for my life, I answered my phone to my son, Christopher. The call lasted 27 seconds. All I could say, sweetheart, I'm okay. I'm running for my life. And I hung up. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in supporting this resolution. But most of all, I urge Vice President Pence to do the right thing. Not for you, sir. Not for me. Not for any one of us here in Congress. But for the future of America. We are counting on you to do the right thing and invoke the 25th Amendment. And I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here with us today. Mr. Jordan, I guess you and Mr. Cole and I on this side are the ones who served with Mike Pence. I served with him for 10 years. I certainly hold him in very high regard, as has been pointed out by Mr. Cole. I trust his judgment. I understand, like you, that he's already discounted the possibility of conforming to what this resolution today requires. But I guess my observation will be, if we trust him with that, with the ability to make that decision, we also trust him if he says that decision is not necessary. Would I be out of line to say that?
No, I think you'd be right in line. Mike Pence is a defender of the Constitution, and I don't think he needs Congress to tell him how to interpret the Constitution. And as you've indicated, he's indicated where he stands on this issue.
So I'm not on the Judiciary Committee as you are. Sometimes when things happen, they set precedents that are then litigated and discussed over the many decades to come. Do you see any potential implications or problems with the rapidity with this action is being taken by the Congress right now?
I do, but I think in some ways we've already crossed that bridge. The the nature in which the Democrats did the first impeachment, and now it looks like they're going to do an impeachment without any type of hearings in the Judiciary Committee. They're gonna bring it to the floor tomorrow. I think that does set a dangerous precedent going forward. That is, are we going to have impeachment all the time, in successive presidencies? So I'm nervous about that. And frankly, if I could, just the double standard is a problem. Mr. Raskin said on January 6, 2017, Mr. President, I have an objection because 10 of the 29 electoral votes cast by Florida were cast by electors not lawfully certified because they violated Florida's prohibition against dual office holding. So Mr. Raskin had a problem with how Florida ran their election, and he's allowed to object, even though the state of Florida said it was okay. Last week, I had an objection to how Pennsylvania ran their election. I objected. Somehow I'm wrong and he's right. The chairman of the committee, Mr. President, January 6, 2017, Mr. President, I object to the certificate from the state of Alabama on the grounds that the electoral votes were not under all no search and regular giving and the electors were not lawfully certified. So the chairman of the government, and I support his right to do this. He objected to how Alabama ran their election. No one from Alabama, their General Assembly didn't say anything. He was allowed to object, but I'm not allowed to object to how Pennsylvania ran theirs. And I would argue we had a much stronger constitutional basis for our objection, in that the time, place, and manner of elections are clear in the Constitution. They are done by the state legislature, not secretaries of state, not governors, not partisan Supreme Court, and not county clerks. So we've been consistent throughout this process. And I would just ask my colleagues, do they object to what the late Justice Ginsburg said? Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, January 6th in the process the Constitution prescribes is the date of ultimate significance. We followed that process at 4 a.m. when that was finished. Vice President Mike Pence conducting that as he's supposed to. Joe Biden became President-elect Biden. End of story. And that's exactly where we are as a country. Now, the question in front of us, as members of the United States Congress, is are we going to move forward in a positive fashion for the entire country, or are we going to continue to have these kind of things in front of us that I actually think further divide us? The process has been completed. Let's move forward.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Chairman, I just one other observation on the way in today. Speaking with some of the members of the Capitol Police, it's pretty clear that they're hurting and hurting significantly. So I encourage all of my colleagues to take a moment and on our way in and out of the building, let them know how much we appreciate them, appreciate their service. Not only do they keep us safe and our staff safe, when the doors are open to the Capitol again, the public is allowed in, they keep the public safe. So they do a tremendous job for the country, and we don't thank them enough. And I'll yield back.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just say for the record, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Raskin, but nobody is saying that you cannot utilize the process that is before us. This is not about the objection. It is about, quite frankly, the lie that was told to the American people, leading up to the present day, which resulted in the terrible events that took place in the Capitol last Wednesday. I mean, I think you could do the country a great service if you just say the 5 words, the election was not stolen. That would help in terms of healing. Tweet that instead of some of the other stuff that gets put on Twitter, because I think that was at the heart of what that angry mob was here for. Because they heard the president, they heard members of Congress appear at at rallies claiming that the election was stolen, and so I mean that's the difference here. And so let's be clear. I now yield to Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is one one of the most solemn hearings I've could ever even imagine participating in. What happened last Wednesday is of a nightmare, one that I never even had that nightmare. And I just remember 4 years ago, I was sitting next to a couple Republican colleagues as President Trump was being inaugurated. And I turned to them and I said, was he your candidate? And in unison, the two of them turned to me and said, well, we had 16 candidates. Was he your choice? And he said, we had 16 candidates and he was our 17th choice. Well, I think their assessment was pretty good, that he has damaged America, damaged the Republic, damaged the Constitution. And I know for me, pursuing this resolution asking Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment or the potential for a second impeachment were the last things in the world I wanted to do. And I couldn't even imagine what would prompt me to do it, except a mob rioted and attacked the United States of America as represented by the Capitol of the United States of America. A lot of people were hurt, particularly our police officers. One died physically, one took his own life, 4 other people died, 50 or more, as Ms. Torres said, police officers were injured. There were thousands of felonies committed by the ransacking of the Capitol, starting with felony murder. And it breaks my heart that we're here today. And, you know, I am somewhat consoled, Mr. Jordan, by your statement that Joe Biden won the election and he will be inaugurated next week. And as somebody who came in with me, I would ask, please repeat that and repeat that and repeat that, sir, to avoid the trouble that we all see brewing over the course of the next week. And we're not here to invoke the 25th Amendment against any members of Congress. Those that chose to object, they objected. But we're here to say that Congress believes, even in these waning days of this administration, that the president is not capable of discharging his duties for the people, for all of us. And I know I wasn't in the middle of the chamber or in the gallery, just I was in my office waiting to come to the floor because we've got COVID as a background to all of this. But I do know each and every one of us, the Capitol Hill Police, our staff, the maintenance workers, the cafeteria workers, everybody was traumatized at some level. And the number 2 and 3 people in our government in succession, the Vice President, then the Speaker of the House of the United States of America, were particular targets of this attack, of this mob. And I don't know how they may have been affected by this, but I do know that everybody's been traumatized. So I would just say, sort of from one lawyer to another, Mr. Jordan, in a cross-examined sort of way, isn't it true that Joe Biden won the election?
Yes, he's going to be president. And I've never said, as the chairman indicated earlier, I've never said that this election was stolen. What I've said very clearly is
Mr.
half the electorate, both Republicans
Jim.
and Democrats have concerns, and
I
we
have
called
the-
for an investigation.
Mr. Jordan, it was a simple question. Isn't it true Joe Biden won the election? Yes or no?
Yes, he won. I mean, I don't know how many times I have to say it.
Okay.
Yes, he won, but there are serious problems with this election that deserve an investigation, and that's what I've called for. And it's not just Republicans who think that.
Okay.
Countless number of Democrats think that this thing had problems too. We
Mr.
called for an
Jordan,
investigation, but you
Mr.
guys didn't want to
Jordan,
do it. No investigation.
Mr. Jordan,
End of story. No, never
Mr.
mind the fact
Jordan.
that a third of the, well, when you ask me a question, I got to give an answer.
I
Never
didn't,
mind
I
a
asked you
third
a
of-
yes or
a
no.
third of
I
the
asked you a
electorate.
yes or no questions. Please, we're trying to bring this nation
Okay.
back together. Jim, geez. I really just want to bring this back together. I don't like these resolutions. I support them. We had damage, injury to this nation, the likes of which we haven't seen for centuries. And I just want the people to know from somebody who's in a leadership position, as you are, that Joe Biden won the election, Kamala Harris won the election, they're president-elect, vice president-elect, and they will be inaugurated into the position of president and vice president on January 20th.
You know who said
Yes,
that? You know who said
Okay.
that? The President of the United States has said that.
okay.
It's going to happen.
Then
There's going to be a
that's-
peaceful transfer of power. But you guys,
That's all.
you guys
That's
don't
all I
focus on
want.
uniting this
Look,
country. You want to impeach the
Miss-
president. You want to look at the 25th Amendment. The
Mrs.
President of the United States has been clear.
Mrs. Lesko can ask you questions and you can add
Sure
if
she
you
will.
want.
Sure she
We've
will.
got, look, I'm not trying to bark at you.
Well, you could have
No.
fooled me.
I'm not barking at you. I just need to have a declarative statement from you so that we can potentially get through the next week without more violence.
Okay.
That's all I'm asking you.
Okay.
I mean, you and I have been here together for a long time. You
Okay,
know,
thanks.
and we've worked together on things and we've been opposed on things.
That's true. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And you know, I think we have a responsibility that rises above so many things to let people know that, yeah, we can work together and we do work together. And that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will
Well,
take the
let's-
reins of the
let's-
administration next week.
Let's work together on condemning all violence all the time. Let's work together on bringing the country together. Let's work together over the next week through this transition, as our country has always done. Let's work together on that. That's the right attitude. And that's the
You-
attitude I have. And I think that's the
I-
attitude the President of the United States has. So let's
Okay,
focus
so-
on that.
To the gentleman from Ohio, I'm with you. Okay? We've worked on a lot of things. We've been in a lot of hearings. We've done it. We've been colleagues now for 15 years.
Thank you.
And, you know, I mean, I think Dr. Burgess, he's left, but he made a good point. French Hill and I are co-sponsors of a resolution honoring the Capitol Hill Police, and particularly the two gentlemen who've lost their lives.
And I support that resolution.
And
I think all of us will.
the police force was brave. The police force was there. They were undermanned, understaffed, they didn't have the equipment or the gear that they should have in facing that mob. And I just thank them for everything that they've done. Mr. Chairman, I democracies are very fragile institutions, and they require the work of every citizen, the dialogue and compromise of leaders. It's work, and our democracy was damaged last week and over the course of the last couple months. And we have a lot of work to do. And I, for one, intend to do it to the best of my ability. We have a wonderful nation. We represent wonderful people. And we owe them to do our best in working together to bring about this peaceful transition of government next week, and to continue to work on their behalf, whether it deals with COVID or infrastructure or the climate or, election integrity, whatever it may be. And right now, I renew my commitment to do the best I can on behalf of this democracy, on behalf of this republic, because it's going to take a lot of work for all of us. And with that, I'd yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Let me just say, I think we finally agree that Joe Biden will be the next president. And the mob that came to the Capitol to try to disrupt our constitutional responsibilities failed. So we now all agree that Joe Biden will be president. But what we don't agree on is that this election was not stolen. And I appreciate Mr. Jordan saying that he never, I don't know, he said he never ever said anything like that. But I'm looking at an article here that he appeared at a Stop the Steal rally in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, 2 days after the election. 2 days after the election.
The five words.
Asking for an investigation, Mr. Chairman.
The 5 words that would be helpful, I think, in terms of moving us forward, and also signaling the people that came to the Capitol on Wednesday to desecrate this place. I think would be helpful to try to bring them down. The 5 words are: this election was not stolen. And if I would appreciate if the gentleman would say those words, because those are the words that I think would send an important signal to the types of people that came here to do harm to not only members of Congress and staff and others here, but to desecrate this citadel dedicated to democracy and freedom.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, I'll yield to the gentlewoman from Arizona, Mrs. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I make my comments and question, I just want to say that it's good to see Representative DeSaulnier. I'm glad that you're back to health and that you're back in Rules Committee. I also am not sure I also continue to pray for Mr. Hastings in his health. And Mr. Roskins, I continue to pray for your comfort, the loss of your son. And like all of us, we pray for the families of those people that were lost as a result of the breach of the Capitol. With that, I want to go to my formal comment and say, emotions are very high, understandably so. There's something that happened in January 6th that has never happened before in the history. And I think that everyone is upset, and rightfully so. But I would like to focus on the bill in front of us. And my Democratic colleagues have won the presidency. They have the majority in the House. With the tie-breaking vote of Kamala Harris in the Senate, you have the majority vote in the Senate. And so I call on you to chalk up the win. Instead, I'm very concerned about this bill and the pending impeachment bill. I really do believe that you pushing this is going to further divide our country, further the unrest, and possibly incite more violence. On this 25th Amendment bill particularly, I agree with Representative Cole. I mean, if you have faith enough in the Vice President to become the acting president, as you call for in this 25th Amendment, why don't you have as much faith in him to make a decision on the 25th Amendment? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I call on my Democratic colleagues. I do think we need to heal the nation. And you won, okay? You won the presidency. You have a controlling vote in the Senate. You have a majority in the House. Why continue this? It's just going to cause more divisiveness. I really honestly do not understand. I call on you to just chalk up your wins and let's move on. In like a little more than a week, President, Biden will be the president. So please, let's just move on and heal our country. And with that, I yield. Well, no, I don't yield back. I actually asked Mr. Jordan, since he was trying to say things and would get interrupted sometimes, do you have anything more you would like to say? You're not on.
Again, no, I think the gentlelady's comments regarding trying to bring the nation together, trying to unify and move forward is exactly appropriate. I've said that now for several days after the tragedy and terrible events that took place at the nation's capital here. So let's hope we can do that, not further divide the country. It's tough to say you want to unify on one hand and then turn around and say that we're going to invoke the 25th Amendment or push the Vice President to use the 25th Amendment, and then we're going to the following day impeach the President, and we're now down to just hours left in the Trump administration. So let's hope we move forward. I agree with the comments of Mr. Perlmutter earlier that we should be able to work together on things that matter to the folks that we get the privilege of serving, all the folks that we get the privilege of serving, those who voted for President Trump, those who voted for President-elect Biden. I do think it's important that we recognize, and we do an investigation, it's why we called for it. There are voters on both sides of the aisle, 80 million of them, who have doubts about how this election was conducted. If for no other reason, we should investigate and look into this. That's what we were hoping to do. We called for an investigation 11 weeks ago, right after the election. But unfortunately, we couldn't get one. So the only chance we could have a debate was on January 6th, that date that the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said is the ultimate date of significance in the process that the Constitution lays out for us to follow. We did all that. So we had that debate. There was objections made. Those objections came up for a vote. The objectors didn't prevail. Vice President Biden is now President-elect Biden and will be sworn in as president. The country understands how that process works now, but I think they'd appreciate it more if we'd actually looked into this election. That's still, again, half the electorate, Republicans and Democrats, have concerns about, have doubts about. That is not healthy for our country. So moving forward together, unifying the country, should involve some kind of investigation where we look at issues that arose in several states. And that's all we were trying to point out on election day. I was clear about that all the way through, as were so many of our colleagues. And I think, frankly, that's what we should focus on as we move forward. I appreciate the gentlelady's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. And let me just say to Ms. Lesko, I want to be very clear here. This is not about winning and losing and vengeance, or this is about truth. And as I said at the very beginning, I think if we really want to heal this nation, we need truth and we need accountability. And to Mr. Jordan, this is the most investigated election in the history of the world. I mean, recount after recount.
Not by Congress, not by Congress.
The recount. And
There's been one hearing in
bottom line is
Congress.
the reason why that there's a percentage of the American people that have doubts is because the President of the United States and the gentleman from Ohio and others have have spent the last months saying that this election was stolen. And so I go back to what I said before, the 5 words that would be helpful for you to tweet or to say, whatever, this election was not stolen. And I think that is, because that is what fueled this terrible episode on Wednesday. And by the way, the president continues to do that. I mean, you might want to look at his comments today as well. You know, we're still very concerned about what happens in the next few days. I'd now like to yield to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to thank my very dear friend, Mr. Raskin, for bringing this resolution forward today. As have many others stated, I very strongly believe that our country is in danger every minute that this president stays in office. If he had the character to do so after inciting this riot, he should have resigned. But clearly he doesn't, and he won't. So the next quickest way to remove him from office where he can continue to do damage is for the Vice President and Cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. And this resolution is a resolution of unity, asking for the good of the country that the Vice President take that action. These crocodile tears about, oh, there's disunity, when the President and some of the people who are testifying here today have for months stoked false claims that the election, particularly in my home Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that there was something wrong with the election, that somehow Trump actually should have received those votes. It's false. There's been no evidence presented. People have concerns because our leaders, because the president, because the gentleman from Ohio, because other people told them to have concerns. There is no reason for concern. There have been counts, there have been recounts, there have been court cases. Our Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, the US Supreme Court has weighed in here. You can't say there's reason for disunity and then say, oops, wait, now we want unity. I mean, this isn't about winning and losing. This isn't even partisan. I mean, the mob that came to Capitol Hill terrorized both Republicans and Democrats. Of the 6 people who were killed, it appears there were more Republicans than Democrats who've been killed. This is such an insane situation that we're in at this point, that we have fencing and soldiers all over the Capitol, that we have members coming down with COVID because it became a super spreader event, that there can't be unity around the idea that a president who incited a mob to disrupt a constitutional function and then refused to do anything about it, that president isn't unfit to serve the country. I mean, that's not a partisan statement. That's a statement of fact. So we would like to support the vice president, and if he's not considering it, to urge him to reconsider that he invoke the 25th Amendment for the good of the country, to prevent any further damage from being done between now and January 20th. And if he chooses not to do that, we've offered our support, then we'll have to take the next possible action available to Congress under the Constitution. And again, we would urge our Republican colleagues, some of them are already supporting both this motion and the impeachment motion. We would urge them in unity and for the healing of the country to join us, because there really isn't another rational solution. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'm now happy to yield to our newest member, Representative Reschenthaler. And welcome to the committee. I wish we had an easier matter to talk about than this, but anyway, welcome nonetheless. We're happy to have you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I truly appreciate it, and it is really an honor to be here. I just want to say that I'm very thankful to Leader McCarthy and for Ranking Member Tom Cole for placing me on the committee. It's quite an honor to be here, so thank you. As you were alluding to, it is an interesting committee topic to join for my first committee meeting, and I am disappointed that the first matter before us today and before me today is the one that deals with usurping the Vice President's constitutional power and authority. I think that the Constitution is very clear. The ability to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment lies with the executive branch. Particularly, it lies with the Vice President and the cabinet members who are vetted and confirmed by the Senate. Congress is only drawn in when the president disputes the declaration of incapacitation. So I think that we should respect the constitutional prerogative that's been laid out before us. I'm also incredibly perplexed that my Democrat colleagues are trying to force the hand of somebody who they clearly have faith in to run the country. Certainly, people have to recognize that by calling for the president's immediate resignation, they're also championing the vice president, obviously Vice President Pence, to lead this country. So if you have faith in the vice president, why wouldn't you have faith in him now to invoke the 25th Amendment if he felt that was necessary? Therefore, I think that the vice president's decision-making ability is very consistent with his constitutional responsibility, and we saw that displayed last week. I also just think it's time to look forward as we move ahead, both in our national discourse, but also with what we debate here, subject debates in the halls of Congress. I hope that we can move forward and focus on measures that unite this country rather than partisan ploys that are aimed at further dividing us. With that, Mr. Chairman, I do have a question for Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan, we've been talking about the election, whether people have faith in the election, and going back to 2016, we had a conspiracy theory that was a Russian meddling. Clearly a conspiracy theory. You had a large number of Democrats who refused to recognize that. In 2020, we have another conspiracy theory. We have members of our party unwilling to recognize that. I'm very troubled by the pattern that I'm seeing with our presidential election. Would you like to talk about 2016 and 2020 as they relate together? And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Jordan.
I think the gentleman, yeah, I mean, look, it was, I don't know how many impeachment resolutions we've had from the Democrats over the past 4 years. We had, I think, my memory serves me right, during the impeachment of a little over a year ago, we had 16 members on the Judiciary Committee, 16 Democrats, who were on record supporting impeaching the President of the United States before President Trump ever had the phone call with the president of Ukraine, which was supposedly the catalyst for the impeachment exercise we all went through. So this is just, it's been unfortunate, but since day one, I think it's interesting. January 6, 2017, Democrats objected to more states than Republicans objected to last week. And that was all fine and dandy. But last week, we object to states, and somehow you can't do that. And I would also point out to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania who spoke prior to you, she made the statement that Americans believe that there was major problems with this election because what leaders have told them. That is just not true. That is just not true. They didn't need anyone to tell them that there were problems with this election. They instinctively understood that there were real concerns with how this thing played out. I mean, we still have a race for one of our colleagues. What's it been, 11 weeks? They still haven't decided the winner. They found ballots in a desk drawer in the New York congressional seat that's still undecided. A couple days in a row, Shazam, here's some ballots. So Americans, they don't need leaders to tell them what their gut already tells them, what they already instinctively know. That you had, for the first time in history, a sitting president get more votes than he got the previous time, but comes up short. Not just a few more votes, 11 million. You got a president guy running for re-election who wins Ohio by 8, Florida by 3, Iowa by 8, and somehow loses, who won 19 of 20 bellwether counties, who had tremendous coattails we see as evidenced by what happened in the House of Representatives where Republicans picked up so many seats. So they instinctively knew there was a problem. They didn't need anyone to tell them. What we should have done as leaders is looked into it, which is what I called for right away, right away. I never once said that this thing was stolen. I said there were major problems. And when you got a third of the electorate who think it was stolen, that is not a healthy situation for our nation. And we as leaders in Congress, instead of just saying, oh, no, we'll let courts dismiss these cases on procedural grounds, we're never going to examine the evidence, we should have dug into it. We have a letter that Mr. Comer and I, as ranking member of Oversight Committee, ranking member of Judiciary Committee, sent to our counterparts, Chairman Nadler and Chairwoman Maloney, asking them to do just that. That would have helped the country. That would have helped satisfy the country. If we'd have got it, we'd have figured it out one way or the other. Nope, can't do it. My guess is, I hope there's been a change of mind. I hope we can do that now. Talk about this, the concern. We put out a report back in September saying, when you go with mail-in balloting, there will be problems. And guess who we cited? We cited former Democratic President Jimmy Carter and James Baker, a bipartisan report that laid that out. Democrats don't want to look at all that. Nope, can't do it. Even though over a third of the electorate think this thing was wrong. That's the problem. So I wish Democrats for 4 years have been out to get the president. I mean, it started with, well, no, it started before he was even president with the investigation into his campaign in July of 16. And then it was the Mueller investigation. Then it was the impeachment. And now it's impeachment second round. And it's unfortunate. We should just be investigating all the rule changes that were made at the last minute in these several states in an unconstitutional fashion that I think created this uneasiness that the American people have about the election.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. I appreciate it. And again, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cole, I'm honored to be. I look forward to working with everybody. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And can I just urge everybody who's not talking to be on mute so there's not an echo? And I also want to state for the record that last week's attack may not be a one-time event. And I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a report entitled FBI Warns Armed Protests Being Planned at All 50 State Capitals and in Washington, D.C. There are still serious concerns about another attack here in Washington, D.C. and in every corner of this country because of the lie election was stolen. And again, I would just say, Mr. Jordan, I think for the sake of the country, it would be helpful if you would simply state for the record that this election was not stolen. Those 5 words, I think, would go a long way to dissuading some of these people who frankly are misinformed and who were taken in, that they should, that the truth is clear, that this election, not only is Joe Biden going to be the next president, but this was an election that was not stolen.
So now, Mr. Chairman, let me get this straight. The left says that they want to silence conservatives' speech, and now that's not good enough. Now you have to say the magic words that the left wants. I've never once said it was stolen. And you can ask the question 6 million times because I've never said it was stolen.
5 words would stop stolen. But anyway,
Do you know what I'm looking for?
I'm going to yield to Mr. Raskin because he's also on this committee. So if he has any questions for himself, he can ask them now.
I don't think he's on. I think he's.
Jamie, you have to unmute.
Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid we've begun to hear repetition of the very same lies and deceptions about the election that got us into this nightmare in the first place. The Department of Homeland Security described this as the most secure election in American history. There were 62 different lawsuits brought against the election, asserting fraud, corruption, and so on. None of them found any fraud or corruption substantively. There was one suit that succeeded by the president, affecting fewer than 100 votes, but 61 of the 62 other cases were thrown out of court, not just on procedural grounds, as Mr. Jordan slipped in, but on substantive grounds. And I'm going to enter into the record a number of decisions by Trump-appointed judges who said that all of the assertions by the president were not grounded in fact or in law. And in case after case, you can see rejection and repudiation of all of the same things that we continue to hear said today, even after a mob of violent insurrectionists staged a gallows outside of the Congress and chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," even after they tried to force Mike Pence not to do his job. Even after 5 people are dead, we continue to hear these lies and slurs about the 2020 presidential election. Mr. Jordan takes us to task for railing against the lawless behavior of the president since he came into office. And I suppose I feel an analogous disappointment that he will go to the ends of the earth defending the lawless misconduct of this president. Is there anything the president could do that would cause Mr. Jordan not to defend him? But that's just a matter, I suppose, of personal curiosity. Look, when he says that the only rejection of their lawsuits were procedural, he is flat out wrong. And I'm going to have somebody count up all of the substantive rejection and repudiation of the very lies that are being told and repeated today. Now, welcome to the committee, Mr. Reschenthaler. It's wonderful to have you here. I want to respond to some of the things that you said. You began by asserting that this resolution usurps the powers of the vice president. And I suppose you know you're speaking in a completely hyperbolic way. If you look at the resolution, it doesn't usurp anything. All it says is that the House of Representatives calls upon Vice President Pence to immediately use his powers under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to convene and mobilize the principal officers of the executive departments to declare what is obvious to a horrified country: the president is unable to successfully discharge the duties and the powers of his office, and to transmit such to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House according to law, according to what the 25th Amendment says. Unbelievably, we're trying to get a dialogue going here, and our colleagues are accusing us of usurping the powers of the vice president. We are demonstrating the utmost respect for the vice president in telling him what we believe the situation is. And you know what? We are backing him up because he has come under ferocious attack from the right wing in the country, which was calling for his hanging last week. And we are backing up against those who say that he must blindly follow the will of the president. It is true that the vice president's role in normal times is to help the president effectuate his Article 1, his Article 2 plans for the country. That is the vice president's job. But the 25th Amendment contemplates a different role for the vice president. If the president is unable to successfully discharge the powers and duties of office, it is the vice president's role to convene a majority of the cabinet or a majority of a body set up by Congress to express and articulate that. We have come to that point, and that's all we are telling him to do. If you read through, Mr. Reschenthaler, the 25th Amendment, you will see that Congress is all over it. In fact, if the vice president, if we pass this resolution and the vice president takes us up on it and decides this is the best course, which we hope he will, the president might say, no, I'm perfectly fine. I can take it from here. He and the cabinet, again, can overrule the president, and then it would be up to the Congress to vote on it. So Congress's role is contemplated to be central. I mean, no one is more central than the vice president, who is the key actor, but Congress is clearly involved, and we are being extremely respectful of the vice president's role in asking him to articulate what the country has recognized, which is we have been brought to a point of crisis and danger. And finally, this, the extreme right-wing websites that echoed the president's call to come to Washington because it would be wild in protesting to try to stop the steal. Those extreme websites right now are calling for a repeat of this event. They're calling for more people to come to block the inauguration of Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as vice president. And they're calling for similar protests all over the country, at state capitals across the country. You will recall that an armed mob confronted the governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, and helped to shut down legislative proceedings there. That is a catastrophe for our democracy when mobs can shut down the work of the Congress. Here, in our case, the counting of electoral college votes. They are also calling and demanding that the president issue pardons for the ringleaders, the conspirators who organized the inner attack on us, the people who helped to bash in the windows with fire extinguishers and take over Speaker Pelosi's office, take over the Senate, sit where Mitch McConnell sits. They're asking for pardons for all of those people. Well, this president has dealt out pardons to all of his political allies. Will those of you who are not going to vote for this resolution at least speak up right now and say that you would oppose pardons for the ringleaders of the mob, of the violent mob insurrection that almost got all of us killed and did get 5 people killed? Will you at least say that? Because I don't want your vote against this resolution to be interpreted that you are backing what the extreme right is saying, which is the president should pardon the conspirators in this event. That would be helpful. I yield back to you, Chairman McGovern.
I thank the gentleman. I now yield to Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by echoing what so many of others have said about expressing my deep sympathies to my dear brother and friend, Jamie Raskin, to he, Sarah, and to his 2 daughters. There is no greater pain or ache than the loss of a child, and I am keeping you, as you know, very much in my prayers and in my heart. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity for us to come together virtually. There is so much to process. I think we are all still in the state of shock. The Capitol, not only under attack last week, but as you and others have pointed out, there continues to be an effort to undermine our democracy, and there is a continued attack on the Capitol. I find it unsettling that virtually every conversation I have now, whether it's on the phone or in meetings like this, the first question that people ask are you okay and are you safe? I mean, isn't it astonishing that we would have to ask members of Congress whether they feel safe and whether they're safe in simply carrying out their constitutional responsibilities? And we've all been in briefings around security issues, and I obviously not going to reveal anything that relates to confidential information, but the fact that we continue to have to be briefed on the security leading up to and beyond Inauguration Day is startling. It is shocking, and there is much for all of us to process. I keep thinking to myself that we all need to ask the questions: when does service to Donald Trump end and service to our country and our democracy begin? Because I think we're at that inflection point. I think we were at it months ago, but to every single American, they need to ask themselves that question. It should be an easy one to answer, it seems to me. I am frustrated, I will admit, by the continued conversation, the articulation that this election is not legitimate or was stolen. I think my dear friend Jamie Raskin, I always speak after him. I find myself crossing out a lot of my notes because he articulates so much better than I would many of the same points. And it is so frustrating when there are lawsuits. I served in a state legislature for nearly 3 decades. And we often state legislatures delegate responsibilities to boards of elections and to secretaries of state, things that are part of the statutes that we pass at the state level. And then to make certain that those statutes are carried out appropriately, we turn to the courts to make judgments on whether the laws have been violated. There is clear, compelling evidence that this election was legitimate, was fair, and record numbers of voters throughout America participated. I find it odd to suggest that somehow the election would not be appropriate because the sitting president got more votes than any person in history, other than Joe Biden, who was elected president with a plurality of over 6 million American votes. And leadership matters. The fact that there are so many Americans now questioning the legitimacy of the election has nothing to do with their insights on the election. It has everything to do with people who continue to undermine it in the national media, on social media, repeatedly, over and over and over again. It is foundational to this democracy. I've been involved in a lot of elections in my life as a candidate and as many of you, as a person helping other candidates. On a personal level, I've won a lot more elections than I've lost, and I'm grateful and I'm blessed that that's the case. But I've been involved with a lot of campaigns on the losing end. And what I've always said to my friends, and I was the party chairman back home for a number of years, when the people speak, we are done. The campaign is over. If we don't believe in that, if we don't come together around that single fundamental issue, we have nothing. There is no democracy. There is no republic. There is no America. It relies on our ability to accept election. The election was not stolen. Those 5 words need to be said over and over and over again. Less important that it be said by Democrats, more important that it be said by Republicans. This election was not stolen. America will bend, but it will not break, and our democracy will not be undermined. With that, I do want to ask a question of Mr. Raskin. Much has been said about the question of unity versus accountability. Are these mutually exclusive? Is this a binary choice that we're left with the question that the only way we can find unity in America is by not carrying out responsibilities for accountability and oversight? Is that the choice that we're left? Is there no way? Is ensuring accountability in your mind foster further unrest or incite violence? Or can we as a nation both heal and unify and still hold a people accountable for their actions?
Mr. Morelli, your question fairly answers itself, and I want to thank you for your eloquent insight in putting this directly on the table. And I think you're echoing the chairman here, who also said that we need to have unity and we need to have reconciliation, but it is through an honest assessment of what happened and accountability for those people who committed crimes against the United States government. You know, those people who injured or killed other people, those people who pilfered and destroyed government property, those people who attacked federal officers, all of them must be held to account under the law. And if there's any member of this committee who disagrees with that, I would gladly yield to them to explain why they think people should be able to get away with this attack on America that we just experienced Wednesday. But having said that, and I'm not seeing any of my colleagues gesture, but having said that, obviously we need to heal. My family, Mr. Morelli, suffered the loss of a child, and I know you, Mr. Morelli, have suffered a similar terrible, terrible misfortune. There are now hundreds of thousands of families in America who lost a family member in 2020 to COVID-19 as that terrible disease spun out of control under the lethal negligence and recklessness of people in government, as well as a lot of propaganda and disinformation about that. And I don't think we can tiptoe around that reality either. There was a lot of propaganda and disinformation from denial of the reality of COVID-19, which still persists in some places, to asserting that you could, cure yourself with injections of bleach and so on, to continued, disinformation about vaccine and so on. So we've got to get back on the high road there. But we have millions of people who are mourning family members who died of COVID-19, who died in the opioid crisis, who died of gun violence. Our country is hurting. Our communities are hurting. The economic effects of the COVID-19 nightmare have devastated lots of families and communities. So we need to heal our country, but we're not going to heal our country by pretending that this violent assault on democracy itself, this massive insurrection in our buildings, which came within a hairbreadth of being a violent coup, we're not going to get anywhere as a country if we deny that. This is what we need an investigation into. We don't need another investigation into the electoral results in Georgia or Pennsylvania or whatever. We've got dozens and dozens of cases. We have more than 88 judges who have rejected all of these claims. In fact, one of the things that kind of struck me about what we were trying to do on January 6th before the mob got in, was that although there were repeated invocations of the discredited Article 2, Section 1 argument that found no favor in any court in the land, there wasn't any attempt to put any facts on the table about any corruption or about any fraud. So the rhetoric is all about corruption and fraud, but there's no evidence even attempted to be offered. They go back to this extremely formalistic, legalistic argument about Article 2, Section 1, which no court in the land has accepted, including the Supreme Court, which has 6 Republican nominees on it now, and which President Trump said needed to be embellished with another Supreme Court justice as quickly as possible so they could rule on it. And everybody in all of the courts simply rejected that argument. There is nothing there. So I think at the very least, I hope all of us will repeat what the chairman of the committee is asking us to repeat, which is this was not a stolen election. This was a valid, honest election. But we did experience something real for the first time since at least the War of 1812, which was a violent mob insurrection and attack on legitimate authority in the United States of America. And I hope that every member of this committee will at least perform the mental thought experiment of turning the political parties around and imagine that the president that you dislike the most of the opposite party coaxed a mob, advocated to a mob, incited a mob to commit these kinds of acts. And would you really be saying that that president should remain in office, even if it is for one more day, much less 8 or 9 days, when a lot more damage could still take place? So that's where I am, Mr. Morelli. I appreciate very much you're saying we are all still in shock. We are all still in trauma. And so, forgive us our trespasses if we are not thinking clearly. We have to do our best to keep together. And I thought that this resolution was something that would be unifying for Congress to get all of us together, not to transfer power to Joe Morelli or Nancy Pelosi, but to transfer power to Vice President Pence under the 25th Amendment of the Constitution, Section 4.
Well, I appreciate very much the answer. I do find it ironic that it is not divisive in some people's mind to question the election, but it is to question the insurrection. And let me just finally, Mr. Chairman, on the question of the resolution itself and whether this is an overreach, we often articulate the sense of Congress on critical issues facing this country and this nation. There is nothing that we do today, and that hopefully we'll do on the floor later, that is inconsistent with our powers, Article 1 responsibilities. We're not directing anyone to do anything. We're simply expressing our belief that the 25th Amendment ought to be invoked, that it is in the interest of the American public and the interest of world security, that this is in keeping with our Article 1 responsibilities, and that we believe that there are clear and present dangers to this country. And so I think the resolution is completely in order, and I will give it my full-throated support. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And I now want to recognize our friend from California, Mr. Sanye, and I want to join with Ms. Lesko in welcoming you back to the committee. You've been in our thoughts and prayers for the last several months, but you look great. We're thrilled to have you back. And so welcome back, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your kind words. To the ranking member, thank you as well for your support to me individually in the last year. You're good people, you're good men, and although we often disagree, I have nothing but respect and affection for both Chairman McGovern and Ranking Member Cole. For my colleague, Jamie Raskin, the admiration I have for you in your presentation today, what you've been through, and most importantly, the grace and the responsibility that you have demonstrated in your job and in your personal life, in your wife and your family, having had behavioral health history in my family. I know how difficult this is, but I also know the road to recovery in this instance, which I'd like to talk about more in another instance, is honesty. And that what happened to you, as tragic as it is, as a tragedy that happened to my family, is part of life. And the way to recovery and healing is accepting that and helping other people to not go through the tragedy that you experienced. So thank you so much for being who you are. And today, you know, we both history buffs. America is filled with providential people and providential moments. And you and this, in my view, will go down in history as one of those moments. So thank you so much. To Ms. Lasko, thank you for your comments. And just briefly, I can't help but say with all affection, respect, and honesty, how incredulous I have been since Wednesday, and I am more now. I think I am someone who tries to listen, is even-handed and even-minded in my discourse, and really attempts to understand and be empathetic towards my colleagues who have a different perspective on an issue or indeed often in life. What we are talking about today, why we are here today, although there's lots that experts and we will reflect on of how this happened, how we got here, but we wouldn't be here with this resolution in the Rules Committee today if not for what happened Wednesday. And in my view, and very clearly and obviously, the president's role in what happened Wednesday, that he clearly, to me, uncontestedly, on Wednesday, incited a riot. And he organized and invited people, saying, it'll be wild. You've got to be here. His comments incited what happened. He incited insurrection in the United States. And what he had in mind was to prohibit us from having the debate and the vote in the United States Congress to certify a presidential election that had been reinforced through the court actions, as Mr. Raskin has said, over and over and over again. That was his vehicle. That was your vehicle to contest the election. And prior to that, it was to compete. And all of us have competed. I have no doubt in my mind, and I know others don't have this perspective, but if this president is given another opportunity, he would avail himself to undo what happened in this election, to ignore the Constitution, and in my view, install himself, much like the president of Russia, for all intents and purposes, for the rest of his life. That's my view. I think in those circumstances, for myself at least, and for many of my colleagues, we have to take what measures we can under the Constitution to hold him accountable. Completely agree with the accountability for everyone involved, but first and foremost him. And this, unfortunately, as weak a tool as it is one of our remedies. And I think the Speaker is doing it in proportion, at least in proportion, given the tools we have. So let me just conclude by saying, I know about, I've learned this past year, having been on a ventilator for 4 weeks, having had doctors in ICU tell my 2 sons that I would not survive, that I had perhaps a 10% chance of surviving. And sitting here today, I think I know something about health and how you heal and the fragility of life. And unfortunately, today, the fragility of our democracy. We can learn from history. The only way to heal this country is with truth, as the chairman has said. It can be painful, it can be dangerous, but these actions we have to take. History will not forgive or forget us if we don't do what previous generations have done to give us this fragile democracy, and that's to defend it with truth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I thank him for his eloquence. And again, we are thrilled to have him back in the committee. I now want to yield to one of our newer members, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Ross. think you need to unmute. No, we can't hear you.
Down at the bottom of your screen.
We still can't hear you. Let's see.
It says she's unmuted, but there must be something else going on.
Yeah. So we're just going to pause for a few minutes to see whether we can take care of this. So if everybody could just remain patient for a few minutes, we'll see if we can unmute Ms. Ross.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
could I use this as an opportunity to introduce two decisions into the record?
Absolutely.
One is a Third Circuit decision, the Trump versus Wisconsin Election Commission, and the other is Trump versus Pennsylvania. In the second circuit? In the Seventh Circuit, okay. And in both of these cases, President Trump lost on the merits. This is just to refute the assertion that they lost only on standing and procedural grounds. The substantive claims were decisively and massively rejected in these decisions, as in other, and a number of judges said that they are not even asserting fraud or corruption. So really the whole thing comes down to this Article 2, Section 1 notion, which was rejected in every court that looked at it. So if I could submit these for the record.
Without objection, they'll be entered into the record.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. So I'm now happy to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your patience with me in my first committee meeting. It's an honor to serve on this committee and get to know the rest of the members. And to Congressman Raskin, my heart goes out to you, and I am so in awe of your strength and your courage, particularly during this horrific week for all of us. And so thank you for your leadership. And I will be honored to support your resolution. I didn't think I was going to have this first week in Congress, as my colleague probably didn't think either. And it's been a tragedy for this country, and we will have to heal. But before we can heal, we have to take our roles very, very seriously. This resolution is about whether or not the current president can exercise his duties in a responsible way for the rest of his term. It's a forward-looking resolution based on two things: how he behaved in the past, which I think we all can agree was in violation of his duty to this country and in violation of the safety and the sacredness of this Congress and this Capitol. He incited violence. There is no question about that. We have only his words to look at. The question now going forward for this resolution is whether he should remain in office for the rest of his term, or whether the vice president is better suited to close out the presidency. And I think without question, particularly because of the admirable performance of Vice President Pence on January 6th and into the morning of January 7th, he is much more suited to carry this country through the next week and into a next presidency. What we do not know is what Donald Trump will do in the interim. And that is the reason that we are calling on the vice president to take action. We simply do not know. What we can do is look to the past, where we have seen him incite violence, use untruths to try to undo an election that clearly he lost. But what he might do going forward is the fear. And that is why we need to take action. And that is why we need to show the support for the vice president and the cabinet in taking action. Now, we've heard from press accounts that the vice president isn't likely to do this, and we heard about a meeting. If we tell the vice president that we have his back and that we, like he, care about the people of this country, about our democracy, and about the peaceful transfer of power, that's a resolution worth voting for. And I will be proud to vote for that resolution. We cannot predict this president. He could do anything. And while he is unable to use his duties and powers to the fullest and consistent with the Constitution, there are others who see our weakness. There's simply no time to spare. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back in full support of this resolution.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You know, so I was just handed a letter here, and I want to read from it. You know, what we're doing today is we're just asking members to have the courage to speak the truth. And we've already seen some members on the Republican side have the political courage to vote against the baseless objections on January 6th. And we have also seen some Republicans come forward and condemn the president's dangerous actions and words. And I thank those members who have been particularly vocal in speaking out. And we've heard of several staff resignations in the administration and here in Congress. And I'd just like to highlight a letter I just saw, and I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record this letter from congressional staffer Jason Schmid. And I quote from his letter. He's a staffer on the Armed Services Committee, a Republican staffer on the Armed Services Committee. And I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts. He said, "The sad, incontrovertible truth is that the people who laid siege to the Capitol were and continue to be domestic enemies of the Constitution of the United States. A poisonous lie that the election was illegitimate and should be overturned inspired so-called patriots to share common cause with white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and conspiracy theorists to attack the seat of American government. Anyone who watched those horrible hours unfold should have been galvanized to rebuke these insurrectionists in the strongest terms. Instead, some members whom I believe to be leaders in the defense of the nation chose to put political theater ahead of the defense of the Constitution and the Republic." It's a long letter, but I'm just a couple of more lines from here. He says, "Foreign intelligence services were likely on the scene and will certainly capitalize on the crisis it caused. Our people will pay a steep price. Congressional enablers of this mob have made future foreign conflicts more likely, not less." He says, "These extremist influences are a grave threat to our ability to defend the nation, and they must be expelled from the force immediately. I deeply regret some members may no longer have the credibility needed to accomplish this work. All of our words and actions in the coming weeks and days will reveal those who believe in defending the Constitution and those who stand only for self-interest and sectarianism. There can be no reconciliation and healing without accountability. And I'm going to put the entire letter in the record, but it goes back to where I began and why those 5 words are so important, that this election was not stolen, because that is what the president continues to say. On January 3rd, he said it. On January 3rd, he said it. And he continues to say it. And as long as he says it, that is a signal to people, for whatever reason, who support him. They believe him. I mean, that is what motivated that mob on Wednesday. And it's not based on any fact. It's a lie. And so I just, again, I mean, I know it's difficult to take issue with the president for some, but he is not helping deal with this current challenge. And I would just hope at some point that we could all agree that words matter and that those words will be reiterated by everybody, Democrats and Republicans. Does any other member of the committee wish to ask a question? Seeing none, I would like to thank our witnesses for their testimony. You are now excused. Are there any other members who wish to testify on H-Res 21? Seeing none, this closes the hearing on H-Res 21. Without objection, the committee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.